last week, of course, marked the 12-month anniversary of the brutal killing of George Floyd, an event that, as we all know, I think sparked a wave of anti-racism protests across the world. And a year on, it's clear that racial tensions here in Kirklees and elsewhere in West Yorkshire have not necessarily gone away. I mean, I live here in Huddersfield. I have my wife and my two daughters. We live here, and my own background is quite a rich mix. I've got Indian, African, Caribbean, and my daughters will also have Scottish and Yorkshire heritage as well. And we live here because it's a really friendly place, a diverse community. And later this year, as some of you may have seen in the blog I recently wrote, my daughter will be going to school here as well. And so I suppose from a personal standpoint, as much as anything else, as well as a professional one, I'm really concerned to make sure that we progress and move on with this particular debate. And, I think it's fair to say that, like many others probably on this call and generally, I'm pretty proud of the progress that we've made in Yorkshire and in Britain generally over the last 50 years. I'm often told by my grandparents, well, they're sadly passed on, but my dad and my family, my parents, that back in the day, sort of 30, 40 years ago, you'd often get all sorts of slogans and signs about people from other parts of the world displayed. And it's great to know that, of course, those things are illegal today and have been for, more than most of my lifetime as an adult. But it still doesn't mean that there aren't events and unsavory things that go on in our society today. And so I suppose I still have that sense of frustration, which I know others probably share on this call. And so it's really fantastic that we're having this debate today. I think most profoundly for me, when I think of myself as, I guess, quite a successful lawyer, when I go into offices, whether it's in Huddersfield or Leeds, I suppose there's still a sense of frustration for me that I see so few people of Black and minority ethnic backgrounds in positions, particularly leadership positions. And I think that's one of the things we need to change, and we need to take action urgently on some of those things. And this is as much an asset-based conversation for me as a deficit-based conversation. And by that I mean, there's been so many studies that show that top businesses are those, and the most innovative businesses are those that have a diverse pool of employees. And here in our own area in Huddersfield and in Kirklees, we have people from just about every ethnic and cultural background. And so I think if we can find a way of bringing people together to work more effectively, we will outperform, the rest of the world economically. And so that's a really key thing for us. It's why I'm really excited that we've launched this network, and I'm really excited that we've got our website up and running. And I must pick out the Huddersfield Students' Union and Raphael Ward for all the work she's done on that, and commend her for helping us to launch that just a couple of weeks ago. And also Diversity and Inclusion Charter, which has now been signed by 12 organisations, all of which are on this call today. And of course, really excited that we are having this first webinar with our two wonderful speakers. So before I invite them to speak, and they're both going to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes each, and then we'll have the Q&A session. Let me just introduce them both in reverse order. So Alison Lowe probably needs no introduction. She is a local resident in Batley, and was a councillor for many years in Leeds. She's the chief executive of Touchstone, a charity that works across the West Yorkshire area, and I'm sure she'll speak more about her work there. And for those of you who have been following the establishment of the new West Yorkshire Mayor, you'll be familiar with the fact that Alison is now the nominee to be the Deputy Mayor and the Police and Crime Commissioner for West Yorkshire. But I'm going to start by inviting our other speaker, Kate Hainsworth, to speak first. Kate is the Chief Executive of Leeds Community Foundation, one of the larger community foundations in the UK. And she'll say a little bit about the work that they've been doing, particularly in relation to in follow-up to the Black Lives Matter campaign and this very sad killing of George Floyd. But Kate is also the diversity lead on the Leeds City Region local economic partnership, and so has a sort of West Yorkshire footprint in terms of some of the things she's doing on diversity and inclusion as well. So Kate, I'm going to hand over to you and invite you to come in. And yeah, as I say to everyone else, if there are questions that come up, please put them in the chat so that we don't lose them. So Kate, I'll invite you in to speak.
Thanks so much, Hugh. Really, really appreciated. And thank you for that introduction. For Kirklees colleagues, Basically, I'm not trying to invade the patch of one community. So Emma and previously Paul have been doing amazing work as a community foundation for Kirklees with one community. So as Leeds Community Foundation, I'm not invading, I promise. Basically, Hugh suggested it might be useful for me to talk more with my LEP hat on, which is the West Yorkshire platform that I've been developing with the LEP over the last year and a bit. But yeah, inevitably my take is also informed by my day job, and that is as Chief Exec of Leeds Community Foundation and Give Bradford. And just a moment to explain how that works, if in case it may not be familiar to you. As a community foundation, effectively we're part of a global network, but across the UK there are 47 community foundations that are accredited, and what we try to do, what we're tasked to do, is to raise money locally and give it out locally. So our job is to raise local philanthropy, work with local philanthropists and organisations and businesses, and do our utmost to channel as much in the way of cash as we can get into local community activity. So our expertise, if you like, is that brokerage role which connects donors with fantastic grassroots local activity. And as such, I think we provide a really important piece of the jigsaw in terms of giving a hand up and a start to an awful lot of community initiatives that would otherwise, frankly, probably not get a lot of support. We're very much at that very beginning stage of communities finding their feet, finding their sense of identity and coming together around a collective idea. And what we really enjoy doing is providing them with that initial bit of funding that gets them off the ground, gets them working and thinking about what they might do with a bit more support that's more ambitious going forward. So it was really, really important to us, and I am going to speak first of all about my day job. It was really, really important to us when the wake-up call of the murder of George Floyd happened, and the quite rightly, questions were put to us, and we were trying to put them to ourselves as, what are we part of the problem? And of course we are. Any kind of established institution like us, we are part of the problem. And certainly a year on. Sorry, I'm hearing myself coming back somewhere. A year on, it still feels very much like a work in progress. I love Hugh's asset-based approach, and I think that's the right way to take it. But we're not perfect. We're definitely not perfect, and I would challenge anyone who says they are. But I do think we have made progress over the course of this year, and that has been by being even more honest and brutal with ourselves than we had been before, and just taking ourselves to task that it was not good enough. What we were trying to do before, it was too slow. It was not root and branch enough, and it basically didn't go far enough. So just to, as I say, I'm going to move particularly on to the work at the LEP, but just to give you a bit of a background in terms of what we have done at the foundation. Being open and honest has been part of our values for a long time now, and we basically fessed up publicly and to each other the things that were not happening. We'd been part of a DEI, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Coalition, a national coalition, actually since 2017. And that had been a great support, gave us the confidence to be as honest as we were being, but also helped our board to go on the journey that needs to happen in any of these situations, to understand precisely where our privilege was was blocking other people getting access to the support we can provide. So we've worked a lot with partners. I'm going to talk about the good stuff now. The good stuff being that we've definitely been able to partner more, and that's been very, very helpful and constructive. Some of those are with national foundations like the Baobab Foundation, some with charities so white, some basically hearing tough things from people that can explain, know that we want to get better and can help us get there. But the main thing I think that we've done, and I'm really proud we have done it, is commission work, which meant that the information we were receiving was coming from particularly Black communities that we were commissioning to find stuff out. And then we were listening really, really hard. And that's the bit that I think we felt we'd been doing before, but we'd probably been listening, but we'd not quite understood, or we'd not quite made that leap to making the change. And now we're in that process of making the change. And some of it's hard, not going to lie, some of it's hard. We've been set up on a set of processes which are to do with due diligence. That due diligence protects us, the donors, the groups, against accusations of money laundering, against all kinds of falsehoods, etc. And those processes are sometimes difficult for organisations who are not constituted, or are constituted in a particular way because of the way they've evolved as an organisation. So thankfully, we're having those conversations now, and I'm really excited that it is work in progress. What still feels like a bigger challenge for us, and we haven't cracked it yet, but we're having the conversations, is looking at our donor diversity. So at the moment, the range of donors that we're working with are not sufficiently diverse, and we're working on that, but it does take time. We find it anyway with any kind of working with donors, and philanthropy is a really long job. So I expect it to continue to be a long job. But the good thing is that we've actually started to make a bit of progress. And just to give you an example of some of the actual grant making that's happened over the last 12 months, it has been very much focused on trying to provide an infrastructure for Black organisations so that they are empowered to demand their absolute right to get the resources. That demand, that awareness, that funder capital, it's a bit of a jargon word, but funder capital is really understanding how funding systems work, trying to make sure that funder capital is embedded in all of our communities. And I have been focusing on Black communities, particularly in my remarks so far, but we are trying to ensure that diverse piece is explored in the round. And so there's a working group that we've got in-house, and that includes trustees, it includes staff, it includes volunteers and ambassadors. And that working group is doing some great work, practical work, and building step by step. So that feels like a good point to move on to the work at the LEP. So the local enterprise partnership work is, I still find it really complicated, but basically it's trying to bring together opportunities for the whole of the sub-region, and working very closely with the combined authorities. And of course, now that Mayor Brabin and Alison are taking the reins, the mayoral devolved authority is going to have much more clout and much more agency to make real change for our sub-region. So it's a fantastic opportunity, and we're very, very excited about how it's moving forward. But just to give you an update on how we've got to this point at the LEP, the work around diversity and inclusion has been in parts has been somewhat driven by compliance. And I say that in the spirit of honesty. I think there's a I think it's important that everybody recognises that a body like the LEP does get held to account, does get judged on stuff, and so compliance with the requirements are things that the LEP has had to take on board. And as such, the work around diversifying, particularly the LEP board, I think probably began in a spirit of needing to comply rather than necessarily being something that was completely understood. But I've really noticed a journey over the last 12 to 18 months. I want to say there's still a way to go, and that's that I feel that responsibility, particularly because in February 2020 I was asked to take on the role of diversity champion for the LEP. I'd only been a board member for a few months before that, so I was still finding my feet as a board member, but also in terms of the diversity champion role, there was still a lot to learn, and I still feel that there is a way to go. However, in the context of that, there have been some excellent bits of progress, and I want us to be able to celebrate that. In terms of the inclusive growth panel that I was working on right from the beginning, put forward a whole menu of work, particularly around working much more closely with the community sector, working on a good work standard, which is around inclusive principles, and really understanding how to measure success and what good looks like. These feel like important steps forward, and they have been adopted. So in January and February this year, they've been adopted both by the LEP board fully and also the combined authority. So they are in train. And one of those things is to ensure that all decisions made by the LEP and recommended to the mayoral authority have a checklist which includes diversity and inclusive considerations. This felt like an important step change back in January and February, and I'm very encouraged by the Mayor's manifesto and interest in leading this from the front with an inclusivity champion. So there's a strong wind behind us for this to be able to be taken forward, I think, very successfully. But in the spirit of honesty, I still think there are some challenges, and some of that is to do with how hard it is, and some of it, I think, is to do with deep fundamental understanding of what is required to achieve system change. And that's really what needs to happen. I'm probably saying things that are already known by the audience, so I don't want to preach to my experts. However, it's fundamental to me that unless there is a thorough recognition of the advantage and the necessity for diverse voices to be involved in every aspect of decision making, until that is fully absorbed and recognised, system change is very hard. And so there are some tough conversations that have been skated around, and there are some that I know will be coming, but that's hard work, because that does involve devolving power and authority, and it does involve changing a status quo, and that's tough as well at a time when an awful lot of change is going through. But it feels to me like there is a real moment of opportunity with the appointment of Tracy as mayor. I feel like we have a window of opportunity with the new mayor and her brilliant champions to make precisely those changes, to build the system that will be truly equitable. And I think there are some amazing examples elsewhere. I think that West Midlands has stolen a march on some of the work that I've been trying to push forward in terms of their inclusive growth unit. They've built inclusivity into the infrastructure of their governance. That's perhaps something for us to look at. I think there's also an opportunity for us to reflect on what has been achieved through the Inclusive Growth Panel, which is currently proposed as being dissolved, and inclusivity provided as a golden thread across all areas of activity. Well, golden threads are great. I've got no argument with golden threads. I'm just concerned that the confidence that's needed to provide strong challenge and robust representation of inclusivity across all areas of work actually needs a locus, needs a place to build its confidence from. And so as long as that place is established, I think we're onto a winner, and the golden thread will really work. But these are early days, and it's really hard to know exactly how things will fall out. But in terms of the robust challenge and the continuing to argue strongly for root and branch change, as long as I am diversity champion at the LEP, that's certainly my intention. And I'd really value others' thoughts in how I can help to champion that better and involve more voices in the work of the LEP. If the LEP continues to support the mayoral authority, one never knows exactly how these things are going to work out. But so far, I believe there is a role for the LEP in the mayoral authority, and as such, I'll be doing my utmost to ensure that this kind of robust challenge and reflection on what diversity, equity, and inclusion actually means is maintained across all of the work. And it is complicated work, no, don't get me wrong, but across all of the work of the authority, so that there is a real opportunity for community voices of all communities to be well heard. I think that's probably a good moment to stop, Hugh. Sorry, I've probably gone on a bit.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Kate, and a fantastic introduction. I think that I'm sure that some of our audience, and even if they don't, as a nimble chair, there's some things we'll come back to. But after Alison's presented, and I should just correct myself. You're right, of course, the local enterprise partnership, isn't it? Not local economic partnership, as I think I said. And I think the other thing just to say is, we're very grateful to you for joining us from Leeds. I know we do have a fantastic community foundation here as well, which I do and others do a lot of work with. But very much the spirit of our network is to try and bring in expertise from a wider remit. We start from the point that we accept we've got a long journey to go to, along as a series of organisations, and so very grateful to you for coming and joining us and giving us the benefit of your knowledge. Alison, I'm going to bring you in now and allow you to say a bit more about yourself and your view on this particular debate.
Brill, I'm just trying to see if you can see my slides.
I can. Yeah, I can see them. So I'm assuming everyone else can. Thanks, Alison.
Brill. Yes, I can see that you can see them now, which is brilliant. So yeah, I was asked to speak about the anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, which obviously shook us all across the globe, despite the fact that it happened in America. In a way, America's supposed to be the place where freedom is possible and black people are equal to white people and everything is possible. But of course, we know that is not the case. And unfortunately, since the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, things in America have not changed. So I've been looking at data from America, and since George Floyd was murdered, another 979 people have also been killed by the police in the United States, 27% of whom are black, although black, and I use the word black in a political sense to mean non-white people. but the black population of the US is only 13%, and so you see the massive disparity between the proportion of people who have been killed by police and that their what their proportion is in the wider population. Of that 27% of people who were killed, 55% were not armed, so they didn't have any weapon whatsoever. And you won't be surprised to know, or maybe you will, that nearly 99% of police involved in killing those 979 people, nearly 99% of police have not been charged. So the arrest, trial and conviction of Derek Chauvin is not likely to be repeated anytime soon. In the UK, it's not much better. So over 100 black people have died since 1990 in police custody. And a much lesser known figure is that between the years 1991 and 2014, a report was done around the number of black people who have died in different kinds of custody, so both prison, custody and detention centres, and the startling number is that 509 people have died in either prison or other custody setting. Black people, according to the Lammy report, make up 25% of the prison population, when we know that the population in general is 14% of the UK population is black people. And if you took out, this is a statistic in the Lammy report that I like to repeat because it's just so shocking. If you took out that overrepresentation of black people above the 14% that we are in the population, that would reduce the overall prison population by 9,000 people. Wow, what a lot of money we could save, what a lot of money we could invest in young people, youth programmes, keeping people safe in the homes, in the communities, and not in a situation where poverty, deprivation, racism leads some people to make some bad choices. And I'm not suggesting that all those 25% in prison have committed offences, by the way, because I know that the colour of people's skin is sometimes the reason why they get sent to prison. I'm sorry if I sound cynical, I've just been around too long, and I did work in the criminal justice system for many years. Another startling statistic is the massive rise of Islamophobia, not just in the general population, but specifically in the criminal justice system. And I think as a direct result of that, prisoner numbers have doubled in the last decade. They're now 15%, and they were 5% of all prisoners were Muslim 10 years ago, and they're now 15%. So over 13,500 prisoners identify as Muslim. And if you look at the people under 18 who are in prison, 40% of under 18 prisoners are from a black Southeast Asian background. So the UK, we might not be shooting people every day as they are in America, but it's not a good it's not a good situation, and we know that racism definitely exists within the criminal justice system. Notwithstanding, it exists in other places too. So we know that you're 4 times more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act if you're black or Southeast Asian. And in fact, Touchstone did a piece of work about 3 years ago with the Leeds and York Partnership Foundation Trust, which is a mental health trust in Leeds, but they take people from across the West Yorkshire and Harrogate area, and we did a piece of work looking at their data for 3 years, looking at who got sectioned. And if you were a black person, you were 240 times more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act or detained under the Mental Health Act if you were black than if you were a white person. If you are a Southeast Asian heritage, you were 150 times more likely to be sectioned or detained. and if you were of mixed heritage, you were 140 times more likely to be sectioned or detained. So we don't need to be told that racism doesn't exist, but we were told that by I'm trying to think of a word for him. A gentleman doesn't seem to fit. Idiot, maybe that's a better word, by this idiot. And I've kept the Telegraph moniker at the bottom because it absolutely makes sense that a person like him should be in the Torygraph. But yeah, the sewage report is the response that we got. We were told that racism no longer, institutional racism does not exist. And, you know, we're doing really, really well. We're getting jobs. We're doing brilliantly. Oh, we're doing all right in schools, except if you're black, of course, but they neatly sidestepped that. So, yeah, we got the betrayal, that is the Sewell report, which the government have yet to come back with their response. But it better not accept the findings of this report. Otherwise, I predict some difficult times, more difficult times for the government from black communities and right-thinking white communities too. So there is a response. There is hope on the horizon, and Kate's already mentioned the fact that I am currently the preferred nominee for Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime. Tracy Brabin has just been elected the very first Metro Mayor for West Yorkshire, and she stood on a really clear platform around policing and criminal justice. And I've picked out some of the things that she said in her manifesto, and these are the reasons that I said yes when she asked me to be her deputy. The representative police force, something that I was really passionate about when I was chair of the Police and Crime Panel for 5 years. So I've had a long history with policing in West Yorkshire. I was formerly on the police authority, and I'm really, really proud to say that I absolutely made some noise, and I made sure that Norman Bettison got sacked, for example. Lots more things that needed to be done that I was at the centre of, and really proud to have been so. And also, as chair of the Police and Crime Panel, it was a different role. We held the Police and Crime Commissioner to account, not the police, as we did with the Police Authority, but some really good wins that we achieved together in that role. And that's one of the reasons why I was invited by Tracy to be her deputy for Police and Crime. So the representative police force was a huge area that we fought for and worked with. The now Chief Constable, actually, John Robbins, was the Deputy Chief Constable, and he led on recruitment. And even though we're only at about 8% of the force being from a black South East Asian background, which is way, way lower than West Yorkshire, which the census is just about to report by the end of the year. I reckon we'll be at something like 20 to 25% across the whole of West Yorkshire, so it's woefully low. But I have to tell you that the processes, the positive action that the police now have in place are second to none. The gap between the processes they have and the proportion of police officers that they get is the trust gap. And hopefully working together with John Robbins, who is now the Chief Constable, and the wider force, and the Black Police Association, etc., we hope that we can encourage more people to become police officers, because only when the force is representative will we see justice for black people across West Yorkshire. Tracy's manifesto absolutely is victim-centred, and she particularly talks from the perspective as a woman who has experienced sexual violence. Her perpetrator was caught and sent to prison. She knew that I've also got lived experience of sexual violence. I was raped as a child, and I lived for 10 years in a domestic violence situation. And because of that and that lived experience, Tracy was really keen that I was at the heart of policing in West Yorkshire for the future, because she wants the response from West Yorkshire Police to be victim-centred, to listen to the voice of girls and women who have experienced violence. That's not to say that men don't experience violence. In fact, we know that if you're a young man, you're much more likely to be mugged beaten up in the street. And that is something that obviously all policing will address, and we will seek to find remedies for that. But the experience of women and girls is particularly complex, and there are so many assumptions, so much negativity, and what's the word? There's so much belief from police that somehow we are the architects of our own situation, and that we have power in that situation, which is clearly not the case, because the power dynamic is massively shifted in a sexual violence and a domestic abuse situation. And we want to really raise the awareness and the understanding of policing around the complexity of violence against women and girls. And my lived experience will clearly help to amplify that message without ignoring the voices of other victims who are not women and girls, because all victims matter, and that's definitely at the heart of her policing pledges. Tracy wants there to be a gold standard for early intervention. So yesterday we met with the Violence Reduction Unit, for example, and talked about a lot of the early intervention work that's happening in schools. And Tracy was absolutely in her element, because working with young people, we heard about Operation Gemlock, for example, which again was cited as an area of great practice in Tracy's manifesto, which has seen knife crime reduced by over 13.5% over the period. I think it was 12 months that it was funded for. We're trying to get more funding now for Operation Gemlock to continue, because it's had a massive impact on knife crime, and therefore the lives of young people who are carrying those knives, because once you get caught carrying a knife, then that's obviously a negative impact on that young person's life for the rest of their lives. So there's lots and lots of promises that she's made around early intervention, working with schools, which I'm really, really passionate about too. I've got kids who are now adults, but I've got grandkids. So it's important that the early intervention really focuses on the whole family, because when a child is lost to county lines, when a child is lost to knife crime, drugs, etc., it affects the whole family. And so Tracy is really clear that working with the whole family is absolutely integral to her success. So that's the young people and family focus as well. The two are inextricably linked. Inclusion is another huge focus that the Mayor wants to bring to policing, and obviously it links with the representative police force, but it is also about looking at wider areas of exclusion that people have experienced. So looking, for example, at gypsy traveller communities, there's currently some white paper going forward to the House of Lords, which I and Touchstone have commented on, that will give extra policing powers to the police to remove the homes of gypsy travellers who have got illegal encampments, for example. The law that is there now is absolutely fine for giving the police powers to remove, and obviously there's a court process that has to take place. The new powers being suggested are unbelievably unfair, racist, and could lead to families losing their children, because the powers give police the power to remove, have children removed because people don't have anywhere to live. They don't have anywhere to live because the police have got the power to remove those homes. So we cannot allow that legislation to pass. And it's areas such as gypsy travellers, such as Islamophobia, because in West Yorkshire, for example, cases of Islamophobia have gone up from 60 cases to over 600 cases in the last 5 years. So Islamophobia is a major issue. It's also the case that Leeds is the 4th worst city for anti-Semitism, and so these are all areas that Tracy wants the police to raise their awareness about, raise their compassion and increase their compassion, because this will help to bridge that trust gap that is currently lacking and will hopefully lead to a more representative police force. And then finally, policing by consent. We can only do that if the communities that the police serve believe in the purpose, believe in the mission of the police. And if that does not happen, then we are back to a place where we have riots, where we have civil disobedience. And I'm personally a supporter of some civil disobedience. I didn't mind, young people in the city centres fighting for the ecology, fighting for the planet. That is absolutely fine. I don't think it's right that people who attack statues should get sent to prison for 10 years. Ridiculous. I believe that civil disobedience at some level is okay, but obviously we don't want to criminalise communities who can no longer trust that the police force that is paid to protect them is really on their side. And so what Tracy and I want to do is create that community conversation with the communities that we will be serving, but also engaging the police in those conversations so that we do have the police seen as members of the communities that they serve, because they are members of those communities that they serve. They live there, they shop there, and we need there to be a better understanding of the communities, but also of the police. And we want to bring those two together so that the police feel part of the communities and the communities see the police as part of their communities. And only then can policing by consent be possible. So that's all I wanted to say on that. I'm sure that there's lots of questions that people want to ask me, and I'm really happy to answer any.
Brilliant, thank you, Alison. And I think we can just see from that presentation and your words that there is a lot of passion and lived experience that you're going to bring to this role. So I can certainly say I'm excited about your elevation to that role, and looking forward to seeing you doing all that work. There's a lot to do. I can see we've got a couple of comments in the chat from Linda and from Tahira. I don't know if either of you actually want to ask a question. Maybe you can spend the next 30 seconds thinking about it, and then if you do, then indicate that to us. If anyone else has a question they want to ask, then please do raise your hand or indicate that in the chat or to Rafa. I have one pre-requested question for both of you, which comes from David Bundy in the policy team at Kirklees Council. You've touched upon it, Alison, but really, to paraphrase, I suppose, it's really, you've given your view on the Sewell report. I don't think Kate did, so I'd be interested to hear what Kate's view is. But I think, what impact do you think it's going to have now on how organisations will tackle institutional racism? And Alison, you made a very important point, I think, which is that actually it is only advice, and it was really an external report commissioned by the government, but it's not a government report. And I don't think the government has yet actually formally said what it wants to do with the report or how it's going to respond. So I guess we're still in this question is quite relevant because both of you, I guess, there's still an opportunity to influence what the government's going to do. So I guess we'd all be interested in, what your view is on that. Alison, do you want to go first? Because it probably follows on from what you just said, and then Kate, I'll bring you in to give your perspective as well.
Well, I suspect that the government are in a difficult position because they've commissioned this report. Clearly, if you pardon my French, Tony Sewell's up their ass. So that is clearly the case because he's betrayed black people and our lived experience of racism. He's told us where to go in the right royal fashion, and they're in a difficult position because they've put him in that position. They wanted him to say what he said. I don't believe there was no collusion with senior people in government, and now they're stuck. So I think that they will try to tread a fine line between accepting some of the recommendations, 24 recommendations. Some of them are actually fine, but they are they're encapsulated in an environment that is false, that in a reality that does not exist. So lots of the research that this report has relied upon, they've only used half of the findings of research. So, for example, there was a national report done on black people's career paths in the jobs market and how well they were doing, but they edited that report. So the author of that report saying, it looks like things are going really well, but then she said something along the lines of, but actually there's not been enough research done into actually whether or not black people do as well as white people. That last bit's been missed out. and the hopeful bit in the beginning has been included in the report as evidence of the fact that there's no disparities in employment rates. And yet there are employment rates cited in the report that say if you are a white person, the rate of employment is something like, I can't remember off the top of my head, something like 77%. If you are a black person, it's about 66%. But if you are from Pakistan or Bangladesh, it's as low as 57%. So the facts don't speak to the report. The evidence is clearly not what the report is saying. And there's some actual errors in the report that the government have now accepted were wrong. So something around Class B drugs, 50% of all Class B drug prosecutions are black people, which, like, what? That sounds ridiculous. And that's an error. It's something like 1% of Class B prosecutions involve black people. So there's lots of like really schoolboy errors. Sorry to schoolboys. And I think that the government will be forced to acknowledge that the research was sloppy. Even the people who've been cited as writing that report, they've all taken a back step and said, no. They're saying they didn't see the whole report. They only saw their own chapters. They didn't see the introduction. So I think the government will be forced to acknowledge some of that, but will massively laud the bits that suit them. And when you've got people like Priti Patel saying racism doesn't exist when she's arresting black people left, right and centre, I think that they actually in the heart of hearts believe that this report is right, want to promote the recommendations, but they'll be forced to temper their enthusiasm, is what I think. And if they don't, there'll be trouble.
Yeah, I've heard that from other people, Alison. I think you're right about a lot of the authors and even people whose data has been cited. I think it's Michael Marmot. Yeah, Michael Marmot said, yeah.
What a star he is in public health. He said they've picked and chosen my research over 20 years, but the recent stuff that I've done, they've completely ignored that because it says the opposite of what they want it to say, and that talks about health inequalities. I mean, I think that the terminology, the race disparities, that they've deliberately chosen disparities rather than inequalities because there's a slightly different story to tell when you talk about disparities and inequalities. But in any event, yes, some of the kings of data research have called into question, and then even charities, Shelter, have said every 8 minutes a black person is either made homeless or is threatened with homelessness. That's not in that report. That's not in that. It's rubbish.
Yes, no, it definitely, and I suppose, Kate, I want to bring you in as well. But I mean, one of the things I know we reflected on recently is I felt that the Seal report was also an opportunity, and government hasn't lost the opportunity, to be fair, because they still have to respond, to sort of reset the discussion around ethnicity and race and racism, and perhaps to enable a wider discussion, particularly in light of what happened last year and the killing of George Floyd and things that have happened since. And as you know, I think my feeling is that they sort of missed that opportunity, particularly the way it was sort of reported in the Daily Mail and in other places. But so, you know, I think Alison's points are well made about the actual findings and the evidence, which I think was pretty shoddy and sloppy, having read it. But I also think, as a macro thing, I do think the government needs to quite quickly sort of pick up the opportunity to reset this discussion and ensure that we can progress as a society. But Kate, do you want to say a few things as well from your perspective?
I mean, just a couple of things. I think, you know, Alison's covered an awful lot, which is great. I just get really frustrated by reports. I think that quite often they're used as an excuse to delay and obfuscate, and rather than being an agent of change. To me, the kind of ongoing research and intelligence that will really inform debate and a new kind of structure is to do with granularity, regularity, and fully independent. So having a set of measures that are regularly collected and are irrefutable seems to me a really useful contribution, because it's then takes the heat out of it being led by a particular Alison, do you want to stop sharing your slide page, I think we're seeing your
all right,
Excel spreadsheet.
All right,
It's probably not what you want.
No.
But yeah, in terms of the actual progress, I think it would be really helpful just to collate data and have that collated regularly and on an ongoing basis, so it can be properly analysed any which way we all want it to be. You know, it needs to be fully accessible to everyone, and once that happens, it's a resource for change rather than you know, promoting a particular agenda. That's probably all I better say on that one, because I think there are some more questions coming on there.
There are some more questions, and there's one. I'll ask them if that's okay, just to keep things flowing. But there's one that I think's right, kind of up your street, Kate. This comes from Portia, and hi Portia. I know Alison already said hello. She says the VCS is often cited as a force for good. However, we see little evidence on the ground of moves to address systemic racism, which I can see her point. You know, particularly in relation to councils and others failing to acknowledge or contextualise the experience of Black-led organisations or the communities they serve. So I guess this is quite relevant to you, Kate. What role should foundations, and then I suppose also for you, Alison, other significant funders, of course the police being one of them, play to address this major deficit? I think really great question, Portia. Kate, if you want to go first, and then Alison, if you want to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Portia. I think it's right on the nose question in terms of the right, how to start with it. I think you're right that the VCSE, like any establishment, is established and therefore needs to be asking questions of itself. How are we performing? How are we delivering equity? And it does fall down in quite substantial ways, as I was trying to explain in terms of our own experience as a foundation. When you actually start asking those very, very blunt questions, you sometimes don't find answers that feel very comfortable, and it's that discomfort, I think, that needs to happen, but to get beyond the discomfort into some kind of action. And that was where our experience of working with this national DEI coalition has been incredibly helpful, because it provides a support network which isn't a safe space, but is a collective risky space, if that makes sense. As a foundation, as a funder, we're working with other funders who have also taken the decision that it isn't good enough what they're currently doing and it needs to be better, and therefore taking the time and space to educate ourselves on what those options are. How can we be better? How can we do things differently? And it's really opened our eyes to a set of options and opportunities. It's also given us a little bit more confidence that even taking a small step that might not be perfect, might not be absolutely right, it's worth taking that small step, even if it then opens you up to further criticism and needing to change further, because you are actually doing something about it. And those small steps then start to add up, and you learn quite quickly what it is that can make a real difference. And it's kind of obvious when you look at it with hindsight, but obviously involving people with lived experience at every stage of that process is crucial. I mean, we've in the past, we've sort of patted ourselves on the back, feeling like we'd involve people with lived experience on all our grant making panels, because we have for years and years now. We've always involved people with lived experience. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't sufficiently root and branch, and that's where we're working to change that. And probably that's a similar journey that a lot of our fellow foundations need to go on. I think it makes a slight, sorry if I'm going on a bit, but it probably makes a slight difference the area of the ecology that we work as a community foundation. We're working often with very newly fledged organisations across all kinds of different communities, all kinds of different requirements, and therefore it's been our job really early doors to think how can we make that experience more accessible, more user-friendly for people who have a completely different experience of coming together as a community and a whole set of different requirements to think about. That in itself, I think, has prompted us to take this journey much quicker. A lot of our fellow foundations who are significant funders, as you mentioned in the text, they quite often deal with what are seen as larger organisations, and therefore their criteria is often even more rigid than the ones that we're looking at now. So I think there is a general awareness across the funding sector that we have to look at this again and make sure that it isn't just blocking a whole set of communities from accessing these funds. And long overdue. This is the time it needs to happen. But I think your point about major funders is right, because it also affects the LEP, and that's where my energy has been focused in trying to ensure that cash can flow into community organisations of all sorts from these significant public body money flows, rather than them always having to go to the usual suspects, which are usually around, it was always more around enterprise and so on, but actually to incorporate that sense that social enterprise, the community sector is an equal and vital colleague player in making sure our economy works well. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, a very comprehensive answer. We might come back to that in a moment. Just for everyone on the call, I know we've just slightly gone over time, and I can see some people are saying they have to leave, which is absolutely fine. But if everyone's happy with it, for those who can hang on, I propose we go on for a few minutes longer, because I can see there's a few more questions that come in. Alison, I wanted to bring you in on that, but if I could also ask an additional question that we've had from Linda Johnson, which I think is directly relevant to your new upcoming role, which is around young people in Kirklees, and her question is about having alternative routes for young people in relation to youth justice. And I think her question is, how many young Black people have been given that opportunity? And also a question directly about recruitment and progression in the police and how independent that process is. I think these are probably two questions you could maybe wrap up into that previous question around the VCSE question as well, Alison.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the great news is that youth initiatives to prevent crime and turning young people into becoming involved in the criminal justice system are two passions that Tracy has espoused in her manifesto, and she's made a commitment to use the Safer Communities Fund, which is a big fund, pot of money that the commissioner, the old commissioner that was Mark Baines-Williamson, now the mayor, has at her disposal. There's lots and lots of money already being spent in the criminal justice system locally. In local authorities have got something like £5 million passported to them through the office of the old Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, which I have no intention of taking back, because that's all around things like youth services, domestic abuse, for example. So I'm going to get an understanding of what we're passporting and for what purpose, and make sure that it absolutely aligns with the priorities that the mayor has put in her manifesto. But I'm confident that the vast majority of that money will remain with local authorities. It might be that we align it slightly differently to meet her priorities, but that's one way that the local authorities and the police can work together to make sure that our priorities are matched. The other thing that she's got is, as I said, this Safer Communities Fund, which is several £1 million, but she's also got huge opportunity to bid for money externally. So the Home Office is constantly stealing money from all the forces. So all the forces lose money all the time. It gets taken by Home Office, aka government, and then they can get it back through a bidding process. It's outrageous, but we can bid for some of that money, and sometimes we get more than we lose. So we're net gainers, but sometimes obviously we're net losers. And the violence reduction unit that I told you about a little bit earlier, huge amounts of money have come to West Yorkshire through that bidding process to the Home Office, and that money, and we're talking about several £1 million have come to West Yorkshire. One of the things that Tracy wants to do is invest the bulk of her Safer Communities Fund into youth. I don't want to say crime, because she wants it to be an early initiative thing. She wants it to be early intervention. So she wants to spend the money in schools with organisations like Catch, for example, who are doing brilliant stuff with young people. Not that I'm promising any money to Catch, by the way. I'm just giving an example that they have had that money in the past. But in Kirklees, there's lots of groups that have had access to the Safer Communities Fund. There's a commissioning round that goes on all the time. And I know there are particular issues in Kirklees about gangs, young people involved in gangs, and that's definitely a focus that Tracy wants us to have in Kirklees to prevent those young people entering the criminal justice system. So it's a huge area of interest for her. 74% of all youth service budgets across West Yorkshire have been cut, 74%, and that's because when all the cuts got started in 2010, when austerity started, the first thing that local authorities chose to cut was youth services, because it wasn't a statutory pot of money, not like social care, for example. So it was easy to cut, but obviously we're now paying the price of that in terms of the criminalisation of lots and lots of young people. And things like county lines, huge consequences of those decisions that were made 10 years ago. And in schools, drugs in schools, I think the latest figures are something like the amount of the number of offences, drug offences in schools have gone up 40% over the last 10 years. So it's a huge, huge issue that we need to address, and it's definitely a passion of hers and it's a passion of mine. So I'm already meeting, lots of people keep emailing me saying, please, can I meet with you? And there's a couple of Kirklees organisations that have already contacted me about work that they're doing in Kirklees, and I live in Kirklees too. So I shall be meeting those to understand what's happening locally, but also across West Yorkshire, so that we can start to put initiatives into place. But we want them to be evidence-based. I don't want to just spend money that doesn't have an impact. We want them to be evidence-based so that we do turn around the life chances of children and young people, because we know at the minute they're a bit shit.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alison. I think in your final response, you answered another question, which was about evidence and using insights to actually help prevent as well as go on. There's lots of other questions, but I think we should probably draw this session to a close, because I know both of you have been speaking for well over an hour, and I know how taxing that can be. So before we close, just a couple of bits to say for those who are still on the call. We have, for those who don't know us already as a Diversity and Inclusion Network, my colleague Raphael Ward has just put into the chat our new website and a link to the Diversity Charter that we're encouraging organisations to sign up. As I say, we've already got 12 organisations, including the Council and West Yorkshire Police, signed up. So please spread the word. I should say thank you to everyone who's been on the call, and thank you to everyone for their great questions. This is just the start of a discussion, I would say. So let's keep in touch. We've got a LinkedIn group as well, which you could join, and we can discuss via that. And obviously, if you contact us through the website. Thank you to both speakers, to Kate and to Alison, for giving up your time to join us. I know you've both got incredibly busy diaries, so thank you for coming along and sharing all your insight. I'm very excited. As I say, I've got a particular passion around this particular bit of the diversity and inclusion debate. I know it's very broad. There are all sorts of other characteristics as well that we have to think about, but for me, it's a personal thing. And so I'm really excited to see your passion, Alison, and the new position you have to implement change over the next 3 years. And also, Kate, I really hope and expect you'll probably become one of the champions, but I don't want to, that's for Mayor Brabin to decide alongside her deputy mayor, not for me. So yeah, I'll say no more other than to thank everyone, and particularly thank Rafa as well for all the brilliant work she's done to help organise this event, and look forward to speaking to everyone else again soon. Thank you, and have a very good afternoon. Enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everyone.